Okay, well, I want to get started then. I'm Suzanne Woods Fisher, and I'm an author with Revell Books. I've written, I think, almost 40 books now, which is astounding. I can't believe it myself, but I have written a series on ice cream, and that is what I'm talking about today, the curious history of ice cream. And the reason that ice cream is on my mind, as I mentioned, this series, The Sweet Life on the left, released a year ago. And then The Secret to Happiness on the right, that released just a few weeks ago. And one thing kind of fun is The Sweet Life has had its film rights optioned for either a TV or film, so with a production company. So we'll see if it happens, but that's kind of exciting news and so fun. And I have book 3 is going to be out next spring. It's all written. It's in what I call the back of the house at Revell, where they're kind of now doing all the line by line editing. And it has a title, but no cover yet. The title is Love on a Whim. So stay tuned for that. But this series is basically about a mom and a young adult daughter who start an ice cream shop on Cape Cod. And they are both in need of a little bit of life's like a respite from life's bumps and bruises. They both have had some challenges, and they end up on Cape Cod. And the mom is taking a walk one morning, and she stumbles upon this broken down old building that is an ice cream shop with a big for sale sign out front. And just on a whim, she puts in this low ball offer that gets accepted. And she's thrilled. Her daughter's horrified because they have absolutely no food experience whatsoever, no retail experience. However, the mom thinks it's going to be easy because who doesn't love ice cream? Everybody does. Ice cream's so special. But the problem is, ice cream can be tricky. And I say this with some authority because my husband is a really serious ice cream maker. His name is Steve, and he takes his ice cream really seriously. So we actually call his ice cream Steve Serious Ice Cream. Just to give you a hint of how seriously he takes it, he was working on his vanilla recipe 59 times before he was satisfied with the recipe. And it's kind of amazing to think this, but vanilla is so hard to do. It's harder than any other flavor. Chocolate, lemon, mocha, mint, strawberry, they can all mask the maybe inferior raw ingredients, the products that are put together to make the ice cream. They can also mask the flaws of the ice cream maker, but not vanilla. Vanilla is so pure. And that's why I probably have just ruined all of their flavors for you. However, that's what makes vanilla such a, sort of a serious flavor. And one thing kind of interesting, I wonder if any of you knew this, but all the greats got their start, and I include my husband with this, but we're talking Baskin Robbins and Ben and Jerry's and Jenny's, and I'm not sure what else. There might be some other regional favorites besides Ben and Jerry for you in Vermont, which I'd love to hear in the chat. But they are all got their start at Penn State University's ice cream school. I don't know if you knew there was such a thing, but it's held in January. It's been going on since 1892. And they have a long course for really serious professionals. They have a short course for serious hobbyists. And that's what my husband went to. I actually sent my husband and my daughter, who is a nutritionist, for this experience. And they came back just like as mad scientists, because the whole experience was really about the science behind making ice cream. Well, with that as a background and an intro, let's move on to ice cream. There's really no way to pinpoint exactly where the first ice cream came about. There's lots of different ideas, but no one knows for certain. There are hints of it in ancient history, and its earliest form probably holds very little resemblance to what we know of as ice cream today. But the first mention of a frozen dessert that I've been able to find, I think this is probably pretty accurate, dates back to Persia in 550 BCE. Well, the Persians had an invention called a yakchul, and it was a type of refrigeration. And the thing about ice cream is it's all about refrigeration. Now they created something called a sharbat, which might be a little similar to our sherbet, and it was made up of sugar and water and flavoring. And they had access to sugar because they were importing with the Indian Empire. Later, we find a biblical mention to a cold flavored drink during King Solomon's reign in a harvest time. And then we move into a little further along in history with Emperor Nero, who was a truly horrible person. And he would send his slaves up to the mountains and they would bring back ice. And with that, they would flavor the ice with honey and wine and serve it to Nero's guests. Well, for all that Nero did wrong, which was virtually everything, he did do one thing right. He stored his ice that had been brought down from the mountains in deep pits and covered it with straw. And that practice is still used today. Well, then there are those who insist that ice cream came out of China. The reason for this is a reference to a milk and a rice dish that was found in China in 200 BCE. And then, of course, was thought that Marco Polo would have brought ice cream to Europe, well, to Italy, essentially. And from there, it spread. But for now, we're staying in Italy for a little bit because we've got 1565 with an architect named Bernardo Buontalenti. He invented this advanced type of refrigeration that started making ice cream available for more people, still kind of elite, but more people during the Renaissance period. And in 1600s, in Renaissance Florence, Catherine de' Medici held a competition for new and unique dishes to be presented at court, and ice cream was presented. We're going to move a little bit east to Russia, and you can see the spread of ice cream. See how it's going. The late 1700s, we have Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia. She loved ice cream so much that she had a special ice cream service just for ice cream that was made from this elegant Sèvres porcelain. You can go online and see this porcelain. It's just really exquisite. It's beautiful. Now we're going to go a little southwest to Turkey, where ice cream's been a part of their culture for at least 300 years. They created something from flour milled with wild orchids and called it dondurma, which means freezing. Well, regardless of its origins, we know that a love of ice cream has been around for a very, very long time in the old world. So now we're going to turn our attention to the New World. And it's really impossible to say exactly who brought ice cream to America, but most likely arrived with European settlers in the early 1700s. And the reason for this thinking is that there were several books that had been produced at this time with confectionery recipes that included ices and ice cream. And a lot of these were English, which is why there's some thinking that it was the Quakers who brought ice cream to early America, because the Quakers originated from England. But there are others who argue that the French, because they are the first in so many things, were the first to bring ice cream to America. Both points of view are probably correct because there were so many ports of entry, and so many immigrants flooding into the New World. But we do know one thing for sure, and that is that ice cream was a frozen dessert for the wealthy. And we can make this assumption for a couple of reasons. One, it required money to own a cow. Not everybody had that. Most likely even it would require 2 cows because you would have had surplus milk to be used. It required large quantities of sugar, which was an imported commodity, as well as large amounts of salt, also an imported commodity. Making ice cream required ice, which meant that somebody had to cut it on a river in the winter and haul it into an ice house with the high hopes that it would still be there in the summer. And, most Americans at this time did not have the luxury of an ice house. Most Americans were farmers. It was an agrarian society. They were surviving. They were pioneers. And ice cream took a lot of time. Most families could not afford to have a family member or even a servant, if they could afford one, to be kind of wasting time on what they would have considered a frivolous dish like ice cream. But we do know of one American who loved ice cream. George Washington, crazy about ice cream. He had all of his ice cream making equipment brought from Mount Vernon to the Capitol while he was president. And there's many accounts of ice cream being served during his administration. In the summer of 1790, there was a New York merchant who confided to a newspaper that George Washington had spent over $200 in his shop in one summer on ice cream, which would be the equivalent of $5,000 in today's economy. There's also a number of inventory records from Mount Vernon that indicate that Washington owned several ice cream pots made of tin and pewter. Another American who loved ice cream, Thomas Jefferson. It's said that he had several ice houses, so many that he could hold up to 62 wagon loads of ice, which would of course allowed for much ice cream. And something kind of interesting about Jefferson is that he sent his chef, James Lemmings, to France to be trained. And this was the first time in early America where a chef was sent to France and brought back trained. And he brought back with him macaroni and cheese, whipped cream, and vanilla ice cream. Well, another thing kind of interesting, if the name James Hemmings kind of tickles the back of your, something sounds familiar, it's because he was an enslaved man by Jefferson, and he had a younger sister named Sally. And Sally was also enslaved, and she bore Jefferson 4 children. Dolly Madison had a love of ice cream. She served ice cream at her husband's inaugural ball in 1813. And at this time, common flavors would have been soft fruits like peaches or strawberries, and they would have been added to a vanilla custard. But Dolly Madison had a curious favorite flavor of ice cream, oyster ice cream. I would love to hear what you think of that. Abraham and Mary Lincoln had a taste for the cold stuff. Before and during the presidency, the Lincolns frequently hosted what they called celebrating berry season parties, and they would have parties for their friends in both Springfield, Illinois, and as well as in Washington. And they would serve fresh ripe strawberries along with cake, and then, you guessed it, ice cream. Well, I'm going to actually back up a decade or two now, because something is going on in Philadelphia. And this is kind of an interesting story about a housewife named Nancy Johnson who had a love of ice cream, and she came up with a simple hand-cranked ice cream churn, and she patented it. And Nancy Johnson did a remarkable thing that has affected all Americans because, one, this is the same design that we use today. And two, she made ice cream available and affordable for everybody. It was now easy to make. Amazing. And I just love stories like that because she probably was just one of those inventors, tinkerers, problem solvers, and she was just trying to figure something out and make a better, make a better machine or make a better ice cream churn. And boy, did she do a great job, because with her invention, the American love affair with ice cream was off and running. The very first ice cream brand in America is Bassett's, which was founded in Philadelphia in 1861. And I just can't help but think that Nancy Johnson might have had a role there. It'd be fun to kind of dig a little and see if they had any kind of connection there. Well, the wide availability of ice cream in the later part of the 19th century led to all kinds of creations, one of which was the American soda fountain shop and the profession of the soda jerk. It emerged with the invention of the ice cream soda, which was just really adding carbonation to ice cream. But there was a backlash to this, and it had to do with criticism of eating sinfully rich ice cream sodas on Sunday. So ice cream merchants figured out how to get around this. They took out the carbonation and they invented the ice cream sundae in the late 1890s. And the name was then changed to SAE and to just kind of remove any connection it had with the Sabbath. Here's another invention, and this one came out of Colorado. This is called the Black Cow or a root beer float. And there was a gentleman named Frank Wisner who was the owner of Colorado's Cripple Creek Brewing. And I want you to think about that later because we're going to talk about this in a minute or two. He had a brewery and he created the root beer float after realizing that the snowy peaks of Colorado's Cow Mountain just kind of reminded him of ice cream floating in soda. He called it the Black Cow. It eventually got changed to root beer float. I don't know if you know it as either of those, but by the end of, you can see the inventions, you can see how things are getting creative. By the end of the 1800s, ice cream was so prevalent that street vendors in urban areas were selling it on the streets. And so picture, a push cart or a kiosk. And they would sell their ice cream to customers in these small little glass containers, like you see in the picture, called a penny lick. Well, as the name suggests, for a penny, you can get a few licks of ice cream. And the customers would lick the ice cream out of the container and hand it back to the vendor, who hopefully cleaned it, but not always. And it wasn't long before penny licks were banned due to concerns about the spread of tuberculosis and cholera. And just a tip, you can go on eBay and find these old penny licks. It's kind of fun. They're beautiful little jars. Well, this brings us to the ice cream cone. Legend has it that in the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904, there were two concessionaires positioned right next to each other. One was an ice cream vendor and one was a waffle maker. And there was a point when the ice cream concessionaire ran out of the containers he was using for ice cream. And the waffle concessionaire looked over and realized his friend's dilemma. And he took a waffle warm and rolled it up kind of in a sphere, passed it to the ice cream vendor, and voila, we have the first edible container for ice cream. That's the legend anyway. 1920s, we have Prohibition banned. Remember I said how there was this Frank Wisner of the Colorado's Cripple Creek Brewing? Well, many of these breweries were converted during this time to ice cream making. In fact, my son-in-law just showed me a recent beer that had on it information, and I texted him beforehand trying to get the name of it, but he didn't get back to me yet. But it actually was a brewery, an ice cream factory, and now back to making beer, which I thought was kind of interesting. Well, there was, So breweries converted to ice cream making during this time. And also over in Ellis Island, newly arrived immigrants were feeding ice cream sandwiches, were fed ice cream sandwiches as kind of a way to just introduce them to the finer things of American culture, sort of a sweet way to introduce them to our world. And then this, I apologize for a little bit, but that popular phrase, it's going to stick in your head now. Ice cream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. It was a song and written by a trio in 1927. Well, what do you think happened to ice cream during the Great Depression? Rocky Road. It was originally marketed during the Great Depression as a metaphor for coping with the economic crash. And as we're sort of moving along in history, we come to World War II, a time of rationing. Sugar was not available, and so many things, people had to hold back on. But for the armed forces, ice cream became just a symbol of, morale booster. And the armed forces, each branch would try to outdo each other in serving ice cream to their troops. In 1945, there was even a floating ice cream parlor that was built for sailors in the Western Pacific. Ice cream is so loved that bombers would actually strap buckets of cream to the bottom of their planes, which would freeze in high altitudes, and then they would return back down and serve the ice cream to their troops. Well, now we're moving to the end of the war. Rationing is over, and you can imagine people's just delight in, indulging after these years of sort of Spartan living. In 1946, Americans consumed over 20 quarts of ice cream per person. So think about that, 20 quarts per person. And I wonder if you have any idea, you could put this in the chat if you want to, any idea how many pounds of ice cream the average American eats today per year? Any ideas? 23 pounds of ice cream. Can you believe that? Just a few years ago, the statistic was 22 pounds. So we are moving up in that direction. But isn't that amazing? And compare that to the end of World War II, where people had just 20 quarts per year. Amazing. The average, or today, a staggering 9% of American cow production is dedicated to making ice cream. And the average dairy cow produces enough milk in her lifetime to create 7,500 gallons of ice cream. Isn't that amazing? Everybody has a favorite brand of ice cream, and usually it's regional. I mean, I'm sure for all of you it's Ben & Jerry's, but the majority of American ice cream companies have been in business for over 50 years. Most are still owned by families, which is really kind of cool. And something on the rise are these artisan-made ice cream shops. I'm out on the West Coast. I live near the San Francisco Bay Area, but there's a company called Salt and Straw that's based in Portland, Oregon. And believe it or not, it started with bone marrow ice cream. They make so many unique flavors, and they're so popular. I mean, it is like a line out the door from the moment they open in the morning to the end of the day. They're now lacing the West Coast, and their flavors are very seasonally minded and so unique. Like during Thanksgiving, they have an ice cream flavor that is turkey, gravy, mashed potatoes, and cranberries. And it's incredible. It's incredible, but I don't know how they do it. So if you're ever out of the West Coast, you're going to have to look up Salt and Straw. In Italy, we've got sort of a similar thing, 19,000 gelaterias employing over almost 70,000 people, and most of them are small and family-owned businesses, just like in America. Well, ice cream isn't just America's favorite dessert, though it is, but we also share that with Italy, with their gelato is so good. Japan has mochi. India has kulfi. This sweet stuff just gets around. And now, before I finish, I wonder if you're ready for some ice cream trivia. So grab your spoon and let's dig in. And if you're in the chat room, I'd love for you to chime in on the chat. So first of all, what do you think is the world's most favorite flavor? I'm going to give you a second to see if you can answer. The world's most favorite flavor.
I say chocolate.
Okay, are you ready? Vanilla. Most favorite flavor in the whole world. Isn't that something? Okay, here's the next question. Did you know that the difference between ice cream and gelato? Gelato contains a third less sugar and half the fat of ice cream. Kind of interesting to know that. When we lived for a while in Texas, and Bluebell was the popular ice cream, still is down where we were living. And at the time, I think it was 22% butter fat. I don't think it's quite that high now, but that is high. Okay, another question. How many gallons of milk does it take to create 1 gallon of ice cream? I'll give you in the chat a second. Three gallons of whole milk create just 1 gallon of ice cream. That much water content. Is that interesting? Okay, here's something that I think is going to really stump you. Which country consumes the most ice cream per capita in all the world? Okay, you ready? You're not going to believe it. New Zealand. Isn't that a surprise? Because they're such a land of extreme sports and athletes, and it's such a beautiful country, and they eat an average of 7.5 gallons per person. So with that, which country do you think would be number 2? Any ideas? Well, if you guessed the United States, you're right. But we are only at 5.5 gallons per person, which is still a lot. When you think of a Ben & Jerry pint and line up 44 of them in your kitchen, that's a lot of ice cream. Okay, next question. Is an ice cream headache a real thing? It is. It's a very real thing, also called brain freeze, and it can be painful. And what is going on is that when an unusually cold substance like ice cream passes over the palate and the back of the throat, it causes your blood vessels to change in size rapidly, and that's what's causing the pain. So it is real. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Okay, and here's another tip or trivia. According to NASA, ice cream is one of 3 foods that astronauts miss the most when they go on space missions. What are the other 2? You can add this in the chat. And I will give you a hint that one is a beverage. I'm going to see if. Okay, are you ready?
Sharon says soda and pizza.
Oh, you are so smart. Exactly. Good for you, Sharon. You are spot on. All right. Do you know what month is National Ice Cream Month? Yes, it's July. In 1984, President Reagan, who had a sweet tooth, signed a proclamation that declared July to be the National Ice Cream Month. And did you know this, that about 50% of the volume in ice cream is air, just air. Think back to Nancy Johnson creating that churn. That's what's happening. More air, more air, more air. And that's what gives ice cream its light texture. Okay, last question. What do you think happens to ice cream sales during times of an economic recession? Sharon's so smart. It's recession proof. So if any of you have an interest in an ice cream shop, at least know you will probably weather a recession pretty well. Okay, so before I turn this back over, I want to just invite you all to go to my website, and I have suzannewoodsfisher.com/gift. And you can download the PDF of Thomas Jefferson's original recipe for vanilla ice cream, brought over by James Hemmings from France. And I'd love to stay in touch. So please feel free to enjoy poking around my website and stay connected. And with that, I think I'm going to pass this back over to Tracy and see if she has any questions for me out of the chat.
So I got a few questions for you from Sharon. So the first question she asked was, for the screen production of The Sweet Life, will you be involved in any way, cast and scripting?
I know I will promise to keep you posted if I do. It's funny, you sign over the rights and you really are out of the picture. And it's but I think if it happens, both company there, I have two different books that are out on film rights, the options. And I have a lot of confidence in both of the companies. But from what I understand, even down to the names of the characters and everything, you were sort of out of it, and hope it goes well. So, but I do think the strikes that everyone is on right now has really brought everything to a halt. That's why I don't want to sound too confident, but it is exciting.
And she says, it sounds like Steve made his way into The Sweet Life. I remember the number 59. Are any of the other characters based on people you know?
Well, you can't help but draw on real life, but just in anything, you're right. But Steve was a great resource for me during the writing of the ice cream shop. This was, this little ice cream shop, and this mom and daughter were trying to figure it out. And one thing most people don't know is that ice cream, generally, most shops purchase a pre-made base, and it would be either a vanilla base or a chocolate base. And from that, all the flavoring gets added, or textures or whatever. And it's usually churned at their own shop, but the base is brought from another place. And it's a great base. There's nothing wrong with that. I think I would probably do that if I were having an ice cream shop. But the thing about ice cream, when you were trying to sell it day after day after day, is you need a repeatable product. You need something that will be guaranteed it's going to taste the same yesterday and today and tomorrow. And there just aren't a lot of ice cream shops that will go to the lengths of having, everything made from scratch. In my book, that's what they did, because that's the kind of husband I have. He's super perfectionist. And that's where the whole idea of my main character, Dawn, who was a CPA in many ways, not just in profession, but in the way she looked at life. She was stuck on vanilla, could not get past it. But she finally did. But it's kind of a fun story. And yes, there's definitely a lot of real life in that. Not everything, but a lot.
So then there was another question. Did your family's interest in ice cream spark this series? Have you been to the Cape?
Oh, well, for two questions. One, Cape Cod is one of my favorite places. My dad was born there, and my uncle had a dental practice in Chatham. And that's where, you in Vermont, you know this well. Most parts of the other country don't know Cape Cod that well, but Chatham's right on the elbow and kind of the jewel of the Cape. And that's where my uncle had a dental practice. So I have visited a number of times. I also was able to use my relatives in such a fun way, because Chatham's kind of a destination town. It's a beautiful town, and the population goes from, a small amount, manageable amount, to 10 times that amount in the summer as people come in. That makes it a very different place, as well as living someplace and visiting are two different things. So to go to my aunt and uncle and to be able to ask them questions based on living there, getting through a winter, and think of an ice cream shop trying to survive in a beach town. That was kind of fun to work on and figure out what could they do to boost sales and bring people in. And that's a lot in Secret to Happiness, of kind of really trying to keep the shop going. So that's a lot of the history of that. And as far as the ice cream question, my editor is the one who wanted the ice cream. She has been to my home. I've had the good fortune of the same editor for all these books with Revell, and I know her well. She's visited our home. She's had Steve's Serious ice cream. she's the one who told me, I want a book about ice cream. And I thought, okay, you want ice cream? I'm going to give you ice cream. Hence the ice cream shop and the details about ice cream and all the, backstory to it that I hope doesn't get too textbook-ish, but sort of fun. So.
And it looks like we got one more question. What was it about breweries that made them conducive to ice cream making?
Great question. I mean, I guess it would probably be the sanitation and the food production and that kind of thing. I don't know if it would be tanks. I think I will have to dig on it a little to find out about that, but I would think it probably had something to do with it was set up to be a sanitized environment for food production. But I'm going to work on that. I actually did an event last night and someone said, when did the root beer float come in? And I thought, I had to find out. So I added that in today and created the slide and shifted it in. I thought it might have been during Prohibition, but no, it was really during the time when ice cream was just starting to really flourish across the country. Well, I have to say our popularity as a family has increased magnificently since Steve's Serious Ice Cream has really gotten settled and known in the area. Steve has even auctioned off his ice cream for charities, so it's kind of fun. It's a great hobby.
Sharon, do you have any other questions?
Has he branched out from his vanilla?
Yes, he has an incredible salted caramel. Oh, Sharon, you would love it. It is so good. And then he's done a number of different flavors, but the newest one is a blackberry. And that's not that easy because once you're introducing vanilla and that custard, it really masks, it coats the tongue, masks the berry flavor. So he's done it now twice. And the second one was more berry flavor than the first, but it's still really pretty mild. So he's still working away at that. And hey, I have a suggestion for you just for fun. Next time you're in the grocery store and they're having kind of a sale on ice cream, pick up a number of different pints from high-end ice cream and then go home and have a blind tasting and take like vanilla or another flavor that's easy, but you will be amazed at the difference of how they taste. It's kind of a fun thing to do with friends on a very hot summer night.
We have a couple of local places. Walpole Creamery, I think, does all of their churning on site. And then there's a little place in the next town over in New Hampshire that I believe he uses a pre-made base. I don't know about Walpole Creamery, but I know the place in Charlestown uses a pre-made base, but he does all sorts of fun flavors. You never know, he's got his staples, but it's so fun to go explore. And like the ice cream shop at the beach, that's always like everybody looks for an ice cream shop at the beach.
I know.
Such a fun theme. I hope you keep the series going. I'm looking forward to reading book 2 and then book 3 when it comes out.
Thank you. I think it's a good wrap up to the series because it's hard to keep a story arc going, a satisfying read per book and then something that pulls you to the very end. But I think it's going to be a wonderful surprise for people.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Dawn's evolution,
Good.
how she kind of grew and expanded. And I liked her quirky mom. It kind of reminded me of me and my son.
Oh, you're like Marnie and Dawn a little bit. Yeah. Upside down.
Sharon and Suzanne, so I have got to go. We have an emergency here at the library.
Oh no.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I'm going to stop recording. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you so much. I'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much for being here.